I'd like to welcome everybody to our fall series of the Brown Bag webinar with Rich Hellig from the Dow Chemical Company, who's here to explain to us goals and tools to drive sustainability. I will be operating this a little differently because I need to drive the slides for him, and I would like to tell everybody we will have our questions at the end as usual, and we would like everybody to send your questions to me, Holly Harris, by chat, and we'll have a reminder later. So without further ado, I send it over to you, Rich.
All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure of mine to be here today on this Brown Bag webinar series. Next. Some of you may remember this picture. It's been called the Blue Marble and was taken by the Apollo 17 mission in 1972. Before the days of the Apollo flights, and I'm actually old enough to remember those days, all we had were artist conceptions of what the Earth looked like from space. Photographs like this one, though, catalyzed for many people a real new perception of our shared home, the Earth. It clearly conveyed that we all share responsibility for the wise use of its resources and processes. This picture has also been credited with being part of the inspiration for the environmental movement of the time. Also in the early 1970s, on the next slide, Paul Ehrlich and John Holdren at Stanford put forth this equation to define qualitatively the impact, or I, of humanity on Earth systems as being proportional to the population, P, the aggregate level of affluence, or I, and the technologies being employed, or T. I mean, this general concept is still relevant today. We do expect the population to peak mid-century or so, and we expect and want aggregate affluence to increase. Indeed, these two are somewhat inversely related. Higher affluence does tend to reduce population growth. But really, our role is primarily to focus on the T part of the equation. This is where we can have large, sometimes even orders of magnitude impact on changes for some activities or functions. Technology is the term we have the greatest ability to use, influence, and impact. Move forward a couple of decades on the next slide, and the ideas of sustainability and sustainable development were really born and coming into fruition. There are many milestones and quotes one could cite to describe the emergence of these concepts. I've picked one from Dow's past, from Vice President Dave Bizzelli, as quoted in a 1992 cover story of the International Business Week magazine, just before the Rio Earth Summit. This quote captures well the need and reality to continuously quest for what is more sustainable. Perhaps an uncommon thought and focus in 1992, a more common and well-recognized one today. At Dow, this quest really started in earnest with the development in 1995 of our bold 10-year goals for environmental health and safety on the next slide. We didn't call them sustainability goals yet, but that is what, in fact, they were. This first set of goals focused on our operations, the things that happened from gate to gate, as we might call it, within our direct control. And the focus was with respect to safety, resource use, and emissions. We would now look back on this and call this the footprint of our operations. It's an essential starting point, our own operations. There's not too much point in looking more broadly and externally until you know what's going on in your own shop. We needed to collect and track and report data on emissions, on resource use, on waste, injuries, illnesses, all the different kinds of impacts that our operations had on ourselves, our employees, and also on our immediate surroundings. These goals were bold and generally successful, leading to quite significant reductions in waste, in energy use, and emissions. The one that, of course, most personally and directly particularly impactful on me was the goal to achieve in 10 years a 90% reduction in the injury and illness rate, which is shown on the next slide, where we didn't quite make the 90% goal in the first 10 years. Those are the yellow bars on the left-hand side of this plot, hitting, though, about 85%, which is really quite remarkable. It showed the possibility of having huge changes in both behavior and results by having the ambitious goals, the metrics, and support of them over a 10-year period. The right-hand side of the chart shows the continuation of this trend under the next set of goals for 2015, which were now called sustainability goals. It's really quite something, quite amazing, to change the injury and illness rate by almost 2 orders of magnitude over 20 years. We went from having injury and illness rate, I'd say, rather typical of industry, to one that is now more similar to, or even better than, say, working in a bank, and statistically safer to be at work than at home. Goals were a key part of making this possible. On the next slide, besides our continued focus on the footprint, this second set of 10-year goals, the 2015 sustainability goals, also introduced a focus on what we now call our handprint. That is, the benefits of using, made possible by using our products. These goals include the idea of measuring aspects of sustainable chemistry related to our entire product portfolio, goals for increasing information related to product safety, and a goal related to breakthrough world challenges, new technologies that would have a significant impact on human health, clean water, food supply, energy efficiency, and housing. We identified and vetted actually 4 such breakthroughs, which are shown on the next slide. These were polyox polymers used in Lifebuoy soap as a way of making hand washing more affordable and practiced in the developing world, working in conjunction with Unilever on those. Betamate structural adhesives to allow better bonding of dissimilar materials and thus weight reduction and fuel savings in automobiles and other vehicles that enabled. FilmTech Eco reverse osmosis elements that achieved a significant reduction in electrical energy input to get the same level of performance for water purification systems. And finally, omega-9 healthy oils, largely from canola, bred to have more oleic acid, which gives increased thermal stability without the need for hydrogenation, thus eliminating trans fats in the oils. I mean, these are all pretty exciting breakthroughs and a great result of having some of these goals in place. About halfway through this 10-year period, though, for these goals, between 2006 and 2015, we started to think about, well, what would be next? How can we continue to have relevant and impactful goals? We started on the next slide by asking the question of what the world and Dow would look like on Dow's 200th birthday, that is in 2097. Now, what would population and affluence and technology and Earth systems look like at that time? What sort of goals would be relevant now to possibly influence our path towards that future state? What even was the right time horizon for these goals? Something very short and perhaps actionable now to drive change fast, or perhaps longer term where we could potentially be more bold and aggressive about what we were going to put into them. Asking these questions used a process shown on the next slide, and the process to develop the goals that literally involved thousands of people. There were core groups of people developing the potential goals in about 10 thematic areas. We asked customers, employees, and perhaps most importantly, a group of external thought leaders. That's the SEAC acronym, we pronounce it SEEK, that stands for Sustainability External Advisory Council. The SEEK meets with Dow's executive leadership and has twice a year, and has done this for more than 20 years to provide really excellent and challenging feedback and input. Employees also had the opportunity to comment on what was being developed, and thousands responded. I had the good fortune to be involved in some of these goal development teams and witness the many iterations we had between the teams drafting the goals and the executive leadership, for which there was really one consistent message that leadership gave back to the team authors, and that was perhaps you're not being bold enough, which was really great emphasis and encouragement to continue to push us to creating more challenging goals. At the same time that we are working through this process, on the next slide, we had the opportunity to look over the virtual shoulder of the UN, who was working on their, or really you can consider it our, because we all are all in this together, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, as a next step for the UN, for global society beyond the Millennium Development Goals. We had the opportunity to, understand how these are being created and look for alignment. And it's of course very easy to just look at the 2 or 3 or 4 word description of these 17 goals at a high level and say, oh yeah, we can align with this, we can align with that. But it takes a little more time and effort to look at what are some of the specific items in the details below these and look for alignment there. A lot of those detailed goals are really designed more for countries than they are for corporations, but they're still quite possible to find good alignment and be truly an excellent source of inspiration for putting together goals. This multi-year broad input iterative process led, as shown on the next slide, to the creation of 7 broad goals for Dow. Each one of these is depicted by icons, and they are from left to right in the top row, defining the blueprint, delivering breakthrough innovation, and addressing a circular economy, and across the bottom row, valuing nature, safe materials for a sustainable planet, engaging for impact, and world-leading operations. Each one of these goals has an executive sponsor and an implementation leader or two. Each has specific milestones and targets from just a couple to a couple dozen, depending on the goal topic, and many of them are quantitative and trackable. They continue to allow us to track and drive work on the footprint of our operations. Always important to have that focus. The handprints of our products and innovations, and the new dimension, this idea of creating blueprints for business and society. Sustainability goals really help drive thinking beyond the current quarter's financial statements and some of the pressures of day-to-day operations. I could talk a long time about any one or all of these, but I've picked 2 to talk about, although you can find more information on any of these online or in the question and answer period afterwards. The next slide talks about the first one I'll talk about, and that is the goal to advance a circular economy. The goal statement is quite broad and focuses on the products and the collaborations necessary to pursue this idea of a circular economy. Since this goal was rolled out 3 years ago, this idea of what it means to be circular has become even better clarified and more people involved in this process. So it's exciting to see how this is a development area for the future. And it's also, of course, a very challenging thing to do. One example of a step in the direction of a circular economy is the concept shown on the next slide of an energy bag. So one of the key challenges to recycle plastics today is that many of them, particularly from packaging, are thin, flexible, and multi-layer materials, and they are just difficult to process by conventional mechanical recycling technology because they're physically hard to sort and separate. And even if they're sorted, then the fact they're a mixture of materials may mean that they're not compatible with other higher purity recycle flows, so there's less you can do with them. The idea behind the energy bag is to allow a simple way to segregate and collect these not currently recycled materials so that they can be used, for fuel value or converted to a new chemical or fuel feedstock, such as using pyrolysis or other chemical conversion technology. We worked with Hefty and other partners to create such a process. So the way it works is that not currently recycled plastics are put in a distinctively colored and distinctively sized bag that could be used by consumers, set out as part of a curbside collection, and then sorted at the Material Recovery Facility, or MRF, or MRF as we call it, and then go on to its next use or application. A pilot in Citrus Heights, California, and then following that, an initial implementation in Omaha, Nebraska, really demonstrated technically that these bags do survive collection and sorting, and that the compositions of the not currently recycled plastics that we get are useful for other purposes, and we can actually change consumer behavior to adapt to this sort of collection process. So the program has now been expanded to more communities in Nebraska, to Boise and other communities in Idaho, and in Cobb County, Georgia. So by the end of this year, there'll be more than 200,000 households that are able to participate in an energy bag recovery scheme. The second goal that I want to talk about, which is on the next slide, is the valuing nature goal. And this is also focused on a new topic for companies to try to act on, and a challenging one to define. The high-level description is on the screen. This idea of including natural capital and decision-making in a large global business on our scale really hadn't been done before this goal was set out. And under this goal, there are a couple of bold, specific targets. The first was that by the end of the goal period in 2025, we would have delivered $1 billion in value through projects that are good for business and good for ecosystems. And to help get us going that direction, a goal that by 2020, all R&D capital and real estate projects at Dow would be screened for the valuing nature opportunities. The picture on the right is one from a biological survey of a constructed wetland in Cedar Trent, Texas, and just hints at some of the challenges in operationally trying to figure out how to measure what good for the environment looks like. Another challenge shown on the next slide is to really define what we mean by nature. It's a word we all use, and it perhaps seems obvious, but it really lacked an operationally effective definition, for us to use in trying to understand our interaction with nature. So we developed the one shown on the screen, and for us to use or for others, that captures this strong degree of interaction between systems, of the processes that these systems describe, and also of the end results of clean water, clean air, and healthy soil. And it really provides a good context to frame our work. Our evaluation of projects and their interaction with nature has been aided by development of 3 tools shown on the next slide. The first is a series of 5 screening questions. So that's the 5Q, 5 questions that are being asked of capital projects and land transactions. They're simple, multiple choice questions. They're available for use in Dow currently and on an internal web page. And the 5 questions are, what is the project cost? Is there a significant impact on, first, water, second, resources, waste, and emissions, and third, land use? And finally, is there a use of engineered natural technologies, such as a constructed wetland, rather than a conventional waste treatment process? Answers to these 5 questions flag the projects that might have a large impact or dependence on nature and ecosystem services. The next level of evaluation for some projects is the Ecosystem Services Identification and Inventory Tool, pronounced by its ESII acronym as EASY. And this tool is a quick survey that can be done while outside at a specific site, which assesses 8 ecosystem services for that site using an iPod app. And this was developed in conjunction with the Nature Conservancy, where we've had ongoing collaboration for 5 years or so. And the tool is publicly available through esiitool.com. The next level for even more select group of projects is to go through a more rigorous scorecard. We're continuing to work with the Nature Conservancy again on what goes into what would now be our second generation of this one, trying to get that right balance between rigor of the results and also ease of use. So that's still a work in progress, but we hope to have a second edition of that coming out within the next year. And then ultimately, significant projects would be evaluated by whatever the most appropriate either economic or environmental tool is for each situation, which may include, of course, life cycle assessment, or LCA, which is a very useful tool in our pursuit of many sustainability goals. So I'll spend a few moments talking about that on the next slide. Life cycle assessment, or LCA, is the quantitative methodology to support the broader and more qualitative concept of life cycle thinking. LCA aids decisions and is shown in this hypothetical comparison of option A and option B. The graphic shows greenhouse gas emissions, energy use, and water use for each, and ideally we would pick for the same cost and performance the option with the lowest of these three. In this made-up example, neither A nor B is best in all three, so the decision maker needs to make a values-based choice between the trade-offs, which is very often the case in the real world. On the next slide, a quick review of products' life cycles. Of course, product life cycles start with materials in the earth or the air or the water, or perhaps even in the technosphere, coming from other processes or uses. They go through manufacturing stages, transport and distribution, and ultimately reach a user who gets some value from the product, and then disposes of it. And that's the end of its useful life, usually to a waste process, but sometimes back to another loop around for a different kind of application. Throughout all these steps, there are energy and material inputs and emission and waste outputs. If you keep track of these in a spreadsheet or specialized software, one can relate these flows ultimately to or from nature to potential environmental impacts through science-based models for the fate and transport of materials and their impacts. Considering all this more qualitatively is life cycle thinking. Becoming quantitative is a life cycle assessment. On the next slide, I show a diagram of, I'll call it our LCA pyramid. When most people hear the term life cycle assessment or LCA, they can think a bit apprehensively about the highly rigorous, very detailed, thoroughly documented, externally reviewed kind of project that complies with the International Standards Organization standards. And these kinds of studies are essential for public disclosure of comparative assertions. That is, if you want to say, this coffee cup over here is environmentally superior to that one over there. Personally, I and Dow generally, we only do a few of these per year, since they do take a lot of work and cost to complete. But we can and do LCA and life cycle thinking calculations much more quickly with sufficient detail to create useful insights for internal decisions, for confidential communications, and to guide R&D choices with much more rapidly than we would to create an ISO-compliant report for public disclosure. Keeping things simple can be accomplished by using, for example, databases rather than specifically collected data for the initial internal calculations. including databases that link costs to potential environmental impacts. These are called, among other things, environmentally extended input-output databases. One also needs really the right culture to consider the life cycle consequences and implications of all decisions. And this is where having the goals in place is pretty important, such as our 2025 sustainability goals. I've, on the next slide, recopied the icons for the 7 goals and added a little pyramid on top of those, the 6 out of the 7, where life cycle thinking or even life cycle assessment is an integral part of the detailed goals and actions under each of these broad areas. Having a life cycle perspective and some numbers to quantify various comparisons is essential to writing blueprints. It's also essential to defining what is a more sustainable innovation, and also to figuring out if a circular economy idea is truly going to use less resources and have less impact than some other option, and to do that same sort of thing for projects that interact with nature. The data and results from evaluating if materials are safe materials are part of the data that becomes inputs to doing LCAs, as are data on emissions and waste production and other kinds of information from our operations. So, for those goals are related to how we use LCA, and there are elements of 2 of them that relate to the information that's essential for putting together LCAs. As a specific idea, on the next slide, I'll mention the idea of quantifying the benefit to burden, or the handprint to footprint ratio, which is part of the goal for delivering breakthrough innovation for Dow, as and the concept is built on a life cycle calculation or estimation. If you express both of these on the same metric, then you end up with a nice dimensionless number that you can potentially compare different kinds of impacts with on the same sort of ranking and evaluation scheme. And we'd like, of course, the numerator to get as large as possible, bring the most benefit, and the denominator to get smaller. The specific 2025 goal shown on the next slide is to calculate this ratio for our current product portfolio, where the target was to have this number bigger than 3. Well, why 3? An International Council of Chemical Associations study in 2009 estimated that this ratio for the chemical industry overall was about 2.5, and we wanted to do better than that. The numerator is currently based on a sum of case studies. Currently, there are about 50. Some very rigorous LCAs, some literature information, some quick estimates, usually focused on the difference in use phase emissions, because that's typically where the largest differences are. And examples of products with the largest benefits come from insulation of buildings to reduce heating loads, materials that allow lightweighting of vehicles, and lightweighting of packaging. The denominator is the total footprint for a Dow, and it's been calculated and reported in 3 parts. Our operations, so gate-to-gate information, our upstream supply chains, and the use and fate of our products downstream. This can be a potentially daunting task, but is really made feasible through use of simplified approaches, such as, again, the environmentally extended input-output databases I mentioned earlier. And although we started with a lot of simplified methods to estimate the total company's footprint, we do strive to increase the quality of this calculation each year. Another tool we use to quantify parts of our pursuit of sustainability is shown on the next slide, and that's the Sustainable Chemistry Index, or SCI. And back one, there we go. No, yeah, there we go, excellent. And the idea to create such a scorecard was announced in 2006 as part of our 2015 goals, implemented a few years later, and then significantly changed in conjunction with the rollout of the 2025 goals 3 years ago. It's an internal scorecard, since there is not a well-established and accepted quantification of just what sustainable chemistry is. It's evaluated annually by business unit, of which there are 1 or 2 dozen or so within Dow, through a question and discussion process. We look at 4 broad themes in 2 areas. On the product side, we ask about product risk, including a semi-quantitative determination of product risks, identification of top chemical risks, and action plans for them, and external collaborations related to safe materials. We also ask about how products are made and how they address world challenges, which includes the footprint of our operations, and also things like the use of renewable or recycled inputs, and if the products are currently being recycled, and finally if the business is engaging in circular economy projects. On the business side, we ask about strategies and recognition, knowledge of health, safety, and social issues upstream and downstream, knowing the ultimate fates far downstream, and we reward high degrees of composition transparency. In sum, the questions try to drive reductions of our footprint, drive full life cycle awareness of our making use of our products, and a focus on societal needs, and ultimately making safe materials for a safer planet, a sustainable planet. One of the deliverables from the SCI team back to each business is a scorecard, shown on the next slide, which looks like this. An example from a business that is doing rather well. They see their score as the black diamonds versus the colored bars, which are the Dow average for the 19 questions grouped into the 4 themes of risk, addressing world challenges, strategy and recognition, and value chain. I've left off the long names or cryptic acronyms for each of the questions along the bottom just for simplicity. They have them published and are available. With this, a business can see where they're doing well, and in this case, the business got a couple of high scores, the 9s in the yellow section, which were for awards and innovations, and also use of LCA and portfolio analysis. Pretty strong scores, the 5 and a 6. 6.5 in the orange section for products and R&D that address world challenges. And they could perhaps be more transparent on compositions. That's the bar over on the far right. And also collaborations related to safer materials, the last bar in the red part. This visual scorecard is supplemented by a text listing of strengths and opportunities, and a complete list of best-in-class answers so that everyone can see what a great answer looks like to each one of these sorts of questions. Finally, to also help create some friendly competition amongst the business units, we create a bubble plot showing their SCI score, their sales, and the profitability for each business. And that's shown on the next slide, sort of. Unfortunately, the details of the bubble plot are proprietary, of course. They're business-specific financial information, which we don't usually disclose. But the results are well visible to management and absolutely do create some competition, giving incentives to businesses to improve both year on year and to close the gap between them and the leading business. So on to the next slide. To summarize the key points, there are many tools with which we can drive our pursuit of sustainability in a company. And we have found the creation and use of 10-year high-level stretch goals to be an essential element to doing this, along with tools to support it, such as life cycle assessment, life cycle thinking, and internal scorecards and benchmarks to track and encourage progress. On the next slide, I'd like to close with another picture. Our planet has changed a bit since the first blue marble picture, and not all for the better for us or for other parts of nature. But we do have options and opportunities. This image, taken last Sunday, being a small example of one, the opportunity to see a new blue marble perspective multiple times a day, courtesy of NASA, NOAA, and their Deep Space Climate Observatory satellite, and can provide even a little daily re-inspiration to pursue sustainability. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rich. That was also very interesting and impressive, and I love the go boldly. I have a number of questions here for you. The first one is that LCA often seems to discourage one end or other of the circular economy, first life or second life, if you will. How does that fit in with Dow's circular economy goals?
It's a great question, and it is one of the challenges of applying LCA's to circular economy ideas, and I'd say that is an evolving question of just what the right way to do that. Historically, we have, when you're taking something that other people regard as a waste, you bring it into an LCA and say it's coming in burden-free. So it is, you know, a wonderful material to use because it, from an LCA accounting point of view, didn't take any energy or resources to create it. And that's been a good approach because taking waste in, you know, they truly don't have other values, and that was a fair assessment of it. But as things get more and more circular, then those wastes start to have a value, and now you have to look at other ways of evaluating the burdens for that. That's like an unsettled science. When I've looked at a few in the past, sometimes I've used economic value for streams that are slightly better than waste, but still low valued coming in. And the European Commission's product environmental footprint program, you know, is looking more at sort of a 50-50 split between a first user and a second user of a material in a circular economy system. But it's a good question, and there's not a settled best approach for how to do that.
Okay. Where do you get the monetization values for natural capital?
So, I mean, that's a great question too. There's a number of ways of doing it. The most straightforward and the ones that we have used more, you know, come in the realm of looking at engineered natural technologies, where we can actually compare this nature-based solution to something that would be built. So you have a replacement cost, sort of, or an alternative construction cost for a way of providing a particular service, such as fresh water or another ecosystem service. So when you can do that, the economics are more straightforward and on a more solid footing. But otherwise, then you have to look at, I'll say, results out of the social sciences and economics, where you can consider, you know, trying to value aesthetics or other sorts of harder to quantify things. And we haven't done as many of those, but certainly are aware of these other techniques. But the kind of replacement cost asset-based is the ones that we've done the most work with.
Well, on that note, we know that you have used total cost assessment and SROI to look at your 10-year goals. Do you use that tool outside of the goal process?
Yes, we have. We have used that to look at, I'll say, elements within the goals. So in addition to using that to look at the goals overall, we have applied those kind of methodologies, the total cost assessment in particular, to look at different strategies for elements within the goals. So yes.
Okay. Let me see. How active is Dow in participating with other circular economy activities, particularly the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's CE100 program?
Absolutely, we're in there. So we are fully engaged with Ellen MacArthur and the new plastics economy. So that's a very important area of collaboration. On the area of marine debris, we're also very involved with the Ocean Conservancy and have been for a long time. And you know, as with Keep America Beautiful, because of course you want to prevent litter and plastics and waste of various sorts from getting to the environment. I mean, that's the best solution. You know, rather than cleaning it up afterwards, you want to prevent it. So prevention is a key thing, and all those organizations have that as a focus. And yes, they are important collaboration partners.
Okay. Do you use organizational LCA to calculate the total greenhouse gas footprint?
Well, we certainly calculate it for us. One of the metrics that we do report and have for at least 5 or 6 years is the total footprint of Dow, and so that's our organizational footprint, including our operations, everything upstream of us, and downstream emissions, including use of products and disposal at the end of the life. So there was the greenhouse gas protocols standard for corporate carbon footprints, and 12, I think, categories of kinds of activities that should be evaluated, and we look at all of those.
Okay. In the benefit to burden analysis, does Dow use versions that isolate the product line greenhouse gas emissions as well as the total Dow emissions for the footprint?
So I'll say yes, because you can calculate that with either Dow average in the denominator or the Dow total. Well, from a total, so the goal we have is to have our current product portfolio have a footprint or benefit 3 times greater than our scope 1, 2, 3 full life cycle footprint. And for innovation, we have a goal to have that number be more than 4, and there we compare it to the Dow average. But on a specific project evaluation, we certainly do look at what would be the impact for the benefit of that product versus the burden to create it. And in each one of those ways of looking at that benefit to burden ratio gives you a little different sort of insight. It can tell you about how, when you're looking at a product specific, how well you might compete to, a next best alternative. And when you look at it against, the overall Dow footprint, you get a sort of better picture of, is this the kind of product that, and a kind of market that we want to participate in for the benefit we can bring. So it's useful to use the different denominators depending on exactly what kind of insight you're trying to get.
Thank you, Rich. Can you explain writing blueprints a little more?
Sure. I would say that writing blueprints is still some of it an art. We do have a blueprint for writing blueprints. This is the sort of high-level structure for what we envision them to be, and have brought out some of our initial blueprints, particularly in the area of water and watershed management. So that's one of the areas where we have published blueprint elements. But it's a pretty wide topic, and I think that depending on the topic you're dealing with, what a blueprint looks like will look different, and I think we will have different implementations and examples to show of what a blueprint looks like in different areas, and they won't all be the same, but we're still definitely kind of learning how to do that.
Okay. And you mentioned the energy bag as one way to deal with waste plastics. What else are you looking at? Can you share that?
Sure. So another good example is work that's going on with on what they call it the MRF of the future, MRFF. So this is for how you can better handle the flexible materials that are going into and currently are undesirable because they literally clog up the conveyance systems and can't be handled because of their form and the density. And so there are technical solutions that are being worked on, and so we are collaborating with organizations to help get the MRF of the future demonstrated and more widely used in practice. As I mentioned, the collaboration with the Ocean Conservancy and MacArthur Foundation are another couple ways. So that we're working on that, and that is really with this focus on preventing plastics from getting into the environment.
Okay. Someone says, great presentation. What is your favorite part about being involved in sustainable chemistry at Dow?
One of my favorite things is that I get to talk about it. So I've spent about 30 years at Dow, and half of that was, a little more than half, was in process research or manufacturing. But process research is fun because you get to have an impact directly on how things are made, and you can make them better. You can use less energy, use less waste. However, almost all of the information there is proprietary, so you never get to talk about it. But in the sustainability space, you need to talk about it, because if you're doing something that is good, new, and exciting, you want other people to know about it, because then maybe they can do it too, and we can all head in a good direction for all of us. So I think the ability to talk about the work that we're doing and to interact with people outside, I mean, those are personally very exciting for me about being in this space.
Nice. I can see that. It's been a very impressive presentation. Another quick question. Other than SEAC, does Dow engage with wider stakeholders in your sustainability analyses?
Yes. So part of the external engagement that we use to develop the 2025 goals also involved talking to customers, and customers, competitors, suppliers, but I'll focus on the customer part of it. And so we did talk to people not just on the SEAC, but other people that we had, I'll say, supply chain relationships with. We were either supplying things to them or they're supplying things to us, because it's important to have this knowledge and awareness of, well, what's important to people on both sides of your company, because we have both upstream and downstream people we interact with. So those kinds of interactions were formally part of the multi-year process to create the new goals. And I'd say that on an ongoing basis, most of those discussions are, focused by people in the particular business units that interact with them. But we do try to stay engaged with people other than the SEAC. The SEAC's very good because they see us more than once, and it is their mission to influence us. Whereas with other people we talk to, they have other motivations.
Yes. Well, I will take one more question, and that is, what is the greatest challenge to pursuing your goals?
I think one of the great challenges with sustainability goals still is that there needs to be a lot of culture change in an organization to really make them come to life and be embraced by everybody. We love using the example of the improvement in safety performance because that represented a conscious choice and direction to try to change people's perceptions and behaviors about what it means to work safely. And it, we've been working at that. We still work at that. It takes constant effort to try to maintain that that focus and living the safety culture. And we're not quite as far along yet with the sustainability culture. Some places we are, not every place, and that's I think the challenging thing.
Well, thank you, Rich. It's been a very interesting and, as I said, impressive presentation of Dow, and I would like to encourage everybody to send questions to Rich. His email is here if you have any more, and I would also like to welcome everybody to our next Brown Bag webinar, which takes place next month on October 11th, when we have Connie Hessler from Interface talking about can we reverse climate change. So tune in again, and this webinar is being recorded, and we hope to have it up by next week if you want to check back in, for those of you who may have missed part of it or want to share with others. So as I said, thank you very much, Rich, and I will now end this webinar.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.